Welcome back to the channel, guys. So we're doing a tier list video. Ways to beat the best decks in the room has been changing every single week, and as a deck builder, someone who enjoys deck building, trying to make a deck as competitive as possible, we're seeing a lot of innovation. A lot has changed, and that's why I think a meta tier list right now is going to be the best time. I think we'll see some interesting stuff. But let's get straight into it. We're going to start off with Exorcista. Tournament is definitely not the best deck in the room anymore. Like a chain reaction, you could say. Exorcista is going to fall off in the meta, but the deck can still do a lot of things by itself, and I think we've seen some tops with this deck. I want to put this deck in the C tier. That said, with Kashtira lying around the meta, I don't see this deck doing as much, so I'm going to go back on my word. I'm going to put this in the D tier, but I just don't think this deck is what you should play right now. Moving on is Ignista. Regardless of what meta it's actually in, it's going to perform if you can get the at arrival on the field, because of course it's unaffected by everything. And then when it goes back to your turn, do the easy update jammer access code OTK, and we're seeing a lot of decks like Mathmech and Marincess find success with that strategy. So I'm going to put Ignista in the B tier. We got Salamangre, a deck that got top 4 at a huge YCS major event. Of course, YCS Pro happened not too long ago. Sprite Adventure 1, and I think the deck just had an insane pilot, making this deck as good as it was. And I also think the ceiling, the potential of the deck isn't actually that high, so I'm going to put in the B tier. It might be a bit controversial. I've shown a lot of Utopia love on this channel. I want to put this deck in the B tier because I see it and I compare it to other combo decks in the game. I compare it to Kashtira, which it can play with Kashtira. It will lose the same things, but its end board is absolutely insane. It can play around Kaijus, it can play around Lava Golem because the sheer amount of negates. It can also play the Adventure Engine, being Nibiru, but I think it's in the lower end of B tier. Draco Slayer, by default, cannot be an S tier deck. Kashtira can block the Pen Zone the second they realize what deck you're playing, and that's basically an FTK. It has a chance because you won't see as many Kashtira players, so because of that, you can still play the Draco Slayer strategy, which is one of the coolest, one of the strongest, one of the most explosive strategies in the game. Ignista is the best boss monster I've ever seen in the game. It's not once per turn, it can bounce, it can special summon, it does everything. For those reasons, I'm going to put Draco Slayer in the B tier. It's hard to judge how good Tournament really is because of its lack of representation, which I never thought I'd actually say. The deck cannot be S tier. It probably is an A tier because every tournament has been hit to 1, but there are ways that you can still make this deck work, get win on the board if you can find the tournament strategy. Rescue Ace, you know, another deck that I play. This deck is this deck is going to go in the E tier. Even the new support coming inside some access is not good enough. The deck can be stopped by a simple hand trap. You can't play around it, but ultimately it does not do enough. The whole strategy of the deck kind of conflicts with it because you want to mill a lot of cards in your graveyard to summon the Turbulence and set 4, which, you know, is actually pretty insane. Getting there is the problem, is the challenge, and I feel like Rescue is missing a archetypal card that lets them do that more easily. And until they get that, this deck is definitely going to sit in the E tier, in my opinion. Unfortunately, I think Labyrinth and Trap are the best trap decks if you want to play one. Let's throw this deck in the C tier though, because with the right build, I think you can get Rex on the field and have him stay there. Now, I'm saying Dragoons is going to represent Guru Dragoons because of Kashtira. Dragoons is actually one of the strongest boss monsters in the game right now. Maybe in the C tier, B tier spot. If you like the sub tier strategy, I think Guru Dragoons is, you know, a nice way to go. With the Bestials losing popularity, Drytron is actually a really cool deck at the moment. Still end on that classic Vanity's Lot. I want to put this deck in the B tier. It's got a lack of representation. I don't think the deck is bad in any way, shape or form. Flundries, another really tough one to evaluate, but I personally want to put Flundries in the C tier. Now that Barrier Statue is gone, you can now, I think, deal with Flundries a lot better than before. Gate Guardian is another potential top rogue contender, but it's still yet to be discovered. It's still brand new. I actually think this deck has a lot of potential, and I can see a level 7 maybe Kashtira engine or Gate Guardian engine in Kashtira being a archetype, being a deck. I just want to see this deck perform more in regionals before I give it a higher tier. So we're going to put in D tier for now. Dark World, I think, did quite well in one of the YCSs. It's also got a few tops in regionals. It released at a time when Tournament was so dominant that people underestimated the Dark World deck. But now that I've played against it, now that I've seen what it can do, and I want to put this deck in the B tier, and in my opinion, I think it lines up quite closely with the Drytron deck in terms of potential and just the combo potential. We have to put Kashtira in the S tier. Despite what people say, I think it is the best deck in the room. In a game where the meta is so diverse, the fact everyone has their eyes on this deck just goes to show how scared they are of this deck. And for me personally, I classify S tier as the standalone decks that stick out from the rest. I want to put Labyrinth in A tier because it does hold its own. It's a really strong archetype. You have a deck that can main D-Barrier, it can main the Virus card, and against decks like Kashtira, for example, or Branded, look at the D-Barrier is really nice, and it's probably the best trap deck right now. I think Konami has made a really great trap deck for players who like that strategy. Just about, you know, nothing really changing for the deck means I want to put it in the C tier. I think it's still strong and it can definitely do a good job of controlling the board. I think the deck has turned into a kind of vanilla interaction with just simple popping, and that just isn't enough enough right now. Yeah, I'm going to put it in the C tier for now. Marincess is again another deck like the Cybers deck. I want to throw in B tier with them because I think this deck can run a bunch of hand traps and then just play the Marincess one card engine. I think it's great that YUGIOH has a diverse format now, but if you're a good pilot for a deck, you can definitely make it become an A tier, S tier deck. Overall, as a general evaluation, I'm going to put it in the B tier. I think Mathmech is a really high B tier deck. Again, it follows the same suit as the rest of them, so I'm going to put it in the B tier for now. It's a high B tier for sure. Mechanco is another deck out of Amazing Defenders. It hasn't got its new support yet. It's such a fast-paced version of how we used to think of Ritual deck. I want to put this deck in a C tier because while there were some cool things you could do with it, and I just don't see the representation, I don't see it being mentioned. After all these ban lists, after all these cards being hit, the two decks that stand for at full power is Branded and Kashtira. And a question for you guys, do you think Branded Expulsion should be banned? Do you think Gimme Puppet should be banned? What are your thoughts on that? Leave it in the comments down below, so I could see for that reason the Gimme Puppet being banned or maybe Branded Expulsion. I'm putting this deck in the A tier, no doubt, and it has a very technical lines thanks to the tennies. I want to put Naturia also in A tier. I think this is one deck you should be afraid of. These cards have changed the way Naturia is seen now. If you end on a Naturia beast, it's going to be pretty hard for your opponent to deal with that, and sometimes that is the FTK. They have the runic strategy, which is always paired with it. I think the whole Book of Moon mechanic feels a bit weird into the Branded matchup. It's a great budget deck. We've seen really prominent players in the meta take this deck to YCSs, so clearly this deck has a lot of potential going for it. I don't think it's anywhere near A tier. I think it's like a mid B tier deck. Punk is another archetype that unfortunately has not got a lot of coverage in, you know, regional tops, YCS tops and things like that. Has caused a lot of controversy in the meta when Hacker Firebax was out. Now that those cards have been banned, the deck kind of remains as a synchro climb deck into like synchro 8. So with the new field spell, they can now draw 2 with Saki and Punisher as one of the best boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! So underrated. For that reason, definitely deserves a spot in the B tier. With that Gold Pride deck, I wonder if Punk Gold Pride becomes a thing. I think that'd be really cool. You might have seen on my channel, we did a Predaplant branded deck profile. This is a great solution to the Kashtira strategy, and you usually play with branded, making it an even stronger deck. I want to put in the low B tier though, because the deck has little to no coverage, and maybe the reason why is the Predaplant strategy is maybe just too old school. We'll have to wait and see. Because of that reason, because the archetype can lose quite badly to like an Imperm on the Cobra or anything like that, or the Ambuloides, I'm going to put in the C tier. I hate to do it, but what it's worth, I think it's a very high C tier deck with an easy climb into the B tier. Maybe in the next meta where Kashtira actually becomes tier 0 thanks to like a crazy ban list, that's when I can see Predaplant Branded becoming the best version of Branded. Expurely Noir is an amazing boss monster, and we're already seeing buyouts happen for the cards that beat them before the deck hasn't even had its new power cards from Cyberstorm Access. That just goes to show people are scared of the deck. I'm going to put this deck in the C tier for now, but I'd love to be proven otherwise if it should be a B tier deck. Crystal Beast is one of those weird archetypes that have been discovered and is actually quite competitive. We see a lot of success with it in the tournament format, and you can search generic field spells, which makes it really good into any, you know, archetype post siding. Against Ruining, you could search Secret Village maybe. I think this deck has a lot going for it. I think there's a lot of tools, but again, with other decks here that don't have a lot of representation, for that reason, I'm going to put in the C tier. I have to put this deck in the A tier. There is just something about the Rika Pet or the Rika Princess. Negate most effects while it's in the graveyard or hand is really strong. The Avalon Rika is such a resilient deck, even doing well in the tournament format and now carrying over here. Because of that, I think this deck is even stronger in the Kashtira branded meta because it can deal with the two strategies really well. The Rika cards tributing your cards as cost is the most absurd thing I've heard in Yu-Gi-Oh! I can even see this deck become an S tier deck post ban list. There's even been more plant support in Photon Hypernova. There's a lot of reasons why this deck remains as one of the strongest archetypes in the game. We're seeing Runic take over right now because of its great advantage with the Fountain drawing 3 cards, which is also once per turn, and of course the fact you can actually quick play spells on your opponent's turn makes this archetype really scary to face off against. Evaluating Scarecrow is a funny one because I am a Scarecrow player. I love the archetype. I want to put it in A tier. I really do. Crazy OTK potential with Defanging and Scarecrow Kashtira. I would love to put in A tier, but I think this is a good place for it right now. When I compare it to decks like Runic, when I compare it to Labyrinth, I just don't see this deck being anywhere near them. This deck is going to be C tier unless proven otherwise. I'm putting Sprite in S tier. I can't ignore the fact this deck just got a win in the YCS Peru. It's amazing how this deck is so resilient, and I have to give it S tier for that reason alone. It's the deck that's doing the most with the worst hits after the ban list. You will remember the hero deck with the Darker Angel lock, stopping decks that need spell cards like Branded, but I'm surprised this deck is not making a name for itself in YCSs and regionals. It is strange, and I definitely expected this deck to take out the meta because of course Kashtira also relies spell cards. So as I'm evaluating this, I'm actually confused why it's not doing as well. But I still believe in the hero deck. I think the strategy is wicked. I'm still going to put it in the B tier. I don't think this deck should be any less. I think that would be criminal to do that. Dragon Link, oh, another high tier, B tier deck. I don't know. This is a tough one to evaluate as well. I want to put it in the A tier. I think it deserves a spot there. They can make something out of nothing. a lot of one-card starters. Borderland is ridiculous, but we are in a Kaiju dominant format, and I can see Kaiju's bullying this deck, but because Diablosis is so prominent right now, I'm going to put it in B tier. No, I'm going to put it in A tier. I'm going to put it in A tier because I really believe this deck is one of the strongest. I don't think it's B tier. I'm going to put it in the C tier. Of course, we can expect more support coming for them real soon. Chaos Angel is another great one, which is obviously going to help Dragon Link as well. Therion by itself, or Therion Punk. C tier potential. I love that the deck has great support, creative support with Therion Irregular. I think Therion in C tier just makes sense to me. I would love to see the deck perform. I'd love to see a actual Therion deck do well. Until that happens, it's going to stay in the C tier for me. Really strange Yu-Gi-Oh world we're living in, where a lot of the crazier deck, when you read their effects, just don't really seem to perform. It's a great time for Yu-Gi-Oh. It's also a very confusing time. Speaking of confusing, I did not expect Traptrix to take off like it did. Of course, if you've seen the pack TCG Balling on a Budget series, this deck is amazing, and it's got a great strategy into the Kashtira matchup. It's a high A tier deck for me. The deck has great starters. The new level 4 trap card is also really great, and the deck now becomes a surprisingly ranked 4 spammable deck. You can even play through Nibiru, which I think is one of the key points you need to be a deck that's not rogued but is meta. It's great that we now have a budget deck that is really powerful, that, you know, can bring a lot of players into the game. Moving on, Tri Brigade. I'm gonna put Tri Brigade in B tier. I don't think it performs as good as I think. I think the M boards are obviously going to be really strong. It's great into the Book of a Moon and Eclipse matchups because they're mostly link monsters, but I think the deck has a tough time walking into the branded matchup and Kashtira matchup, and that is going to be the way we evaluate most decks here. But something in me wants to put this deck in the A tier. I don't know what it is, but I am going to throw this deck in the A tier. Tri Brigade Lyrilisk is still a really good strategy. Thunder Patrol also did really well in, I think, YCS Peru. I think that's a very spread out format, which was, you know, it's really nice to see. Not caring at all about the Kashtira matchup. It means all the Kaijus you played now have even more application, and of course they played the adventure version to negate Nibiru, and the new powerful, I want to say, Earth ship, the Earth Pendulum Synchro. And also, if you didn't know, it can actually give a token to your opponent's field, turning off the Kashtira matchup. So yeah, really strong deck. Another deck I want to put in A tier, which sounds so bizarre to me and is making me question all the decks in the B tier at the moment. The Dinosaur deck is another great one into the Kashtira matchup, so by default it definitely has a name somewhere in the B tier, but you can lose to really simple things like bricking. Miscellaneous is at 1, but tricking Lithosagim is at 3. Black Diablosis can be a game ender. Honestly, when you take out that much extra deck cards, it's hard to really make a comeback, which is Nibiru proof at some time. Yeah, it's hard to break that board, and I think for that reason I'm going to put it in B tier. We've seen a lot of big changes happen every week. Something new is changing. We're seeing a lot of innovation with the current meta, and because of how diverse it is, I think it's one of the best, and maybe the most fun meta we've seen in a while. And there we go, guys. That's been my meta deck tier list for the current format. What do you think of this? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree with any of these takes? And that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.